feel like everyone and their mom wants to move to Australia. Australia is always looked at in a good light. There's very nice people, there's very good coffee, the beaches, the sun. It's got it all. Or so you would think.
Oh my god. Oh my god.
If you're thinking of moving to Australia, I'll stop you right there because it is not exactly what it seems. Today, I'll be going into the details of why you should not move to Australia, and some things that I wish people told me before I moved. So you probably hear from my accent, it's not Australian, it is an American accent. I was originally born in Australia, so I do have Australian citizenship, but then I moved over to America when I was about 8 years old. So I remembered enough about Australia, but not enough that was core to living here like an adult. I really wish I had a video like this to watch before I moved over, just so I could get an idea of what I was actually getting into. So I'm gonna be specifically talking about Melbourne today because that's where I'm living. Also, I know everyone pronounces it Melbourne, but I don't have an Australian accent, so I'm not going to say it the same way that the Australians are. I'm sorry. So this video can come across quite pessimistic. There are a lot of positives about living in Australia, but I'm just focusing on why you shouldn't move here and some things to think about before you make the move. First thing that no one really talks about is the hay fever. The hay fever in the city especially is so bad in Australia. I think it's a combination of having really strong wind and then also in the city, all of the trees are the same kind of type and they also lose their pollen all at the same time. So you're walking in the city and it feels like snow is coming down and hitting your face, but really it's pollen. And it's just, oh my gosh, my eyes get so itchy, my throat gets itchy. It's just horrible. Everyone pretty much has to take antihistamines because it's so bad. I don't know what it is, but it's horrible. And then in combination with the wind, because it actually is quite windy here. So that's another point. Because of the wind and with all the pollen, it just hurts your face so bad. I think the reason behind the hay fever is also geographically because we have the larger bit of Australia is all quite desert. A lot of the winds are really strong coming across the continent because they're warmer from the north and they're coming down to the south where it's colder. And then in combination of that, you have the Antarctic winds coming up and they kind of meet. I don't actually know if this is totally right, but this is what I've been told. But then those winds meet in the middle and just create so much wind and so much turbulence, and we get all of this really strong wind and also just the pollen with it. So it's just a disaster. You've probably heard of the bugs as well and just the insects. I find they're not as bad in Melbourne as they are in the further north cities. So that could be like the Sunshine Coast or Sydney or Brisbane. In Melbourne, we definitely still do have a lot of insects. Some of the most poisonous insects and spiders and snakes live here. I actually haven't even seen a snake here. I saw more in California, which I find kind of interesting, but maybe I'm just not out in the bush because I'm scared, to be honest. But especially living in a house, there are a lot of spiders just kind of crawling everywhere. You definitely have to check your shoes and have to check, like, if you're going into a shed, you have to look for some spiders as well, making sure there's nothing in there. So it's just like an extra thought process that you have to have of, okay, I gotta make sure that there's no spiders everywhere. I feel like if you live more regionally, you definitely see more of the presence of the insects and the animals, but I'm quite close to the city at this point, so it's not as bad as I think it could be. In combination with all of the insects, the flies are insane. They're just different from Californian flies. I don't know what it is, but they like stick to your face so much more. They're just more annoying. They're also way bigger. They're the size of like a US quarter sometimes, and they're called blowflies and they're absolutely huge. So if you're someone that gets really annoyed by flies, maybe stay away from Australia because they're everywhere. Luckily in Melbourne, it gets cold enough during the winter that you don't have to worry about them then. But when the summertime rolls around, oh my God, they're so bad. Another hard thing about coming to Australia is actually visas. Luckily, I was an Australian citizen, so when I came here, it was completely easy and I didn't have to worry about it. However, if you're someone coming from another country, visas can be a little bit more difficult to get. When I was in the US, an American visa and getting permanent residency is like insanely tough. So when I actually moved to the US, I wasn't even a citizen of the US, so I had to go into the whole process of getting one. It ended up taking me 15 years to get citizenship, which is insane. Australia is not as bad, but it's still difficult in comparison to other countries. But a good thing that Australia has is actually called a partner visa. You can actually come over to Australia if you're dating or married or just have a partnership with someone who is Australian and has a citizenship. I know so many people that have met an Australian abroad and then moved over here to Australia and then been on the partner visa. So that gives them full working rights. They're able to travel, do everything that you pretty much can as a permanent resident, I think. Also, within Melbourne, there are a lot of Irish people that move over, and they have all told me the story of doing the 88 days. So obviously it's not just an Irish thing, but I just know a lot of immigrants that come over that are Irish. How their working holiday visa works is that you get the opportunity to work for a company for 6 months, but if you want to extend out of that 6 months, you have to go do regional farm work for 88 days. Which is pretty much like 3 months of working on a farm in some regional part of Australia. Some people really like it. I've heard good stories, but at the same time, you would not catch me out in a farm digging or gardening or anything like that. No thanks. So definitely keep that in mind if you are coming over on a working holiday visa, that's part of Australia's immigration policy. If you're someone who is really pale or someone who's very sensitive to sunlight, the UV here is so high and so dangerous. You can burn sometimes in like 15 minutes. As a white person, I definitely have had my fair share of burns, but the bad ones have definitely been in Australia. You have to be so aware of putting on sunscreen, reapplying. When I was in California, I could maybe put 1 layer of sunscreen on and be good for the whole day, but here you have to reapply every 2 hours or you're actually gonna get burned. One time I was at a tennis tournament and it was kind of cloudy that day. It wasn't too hot, but I was wearing a long sleeve, jeans, shoes, and a hat, and I had put sunscreen on my face, but I hadn't put sunscreen on my hands. So my hands got burnt. Like, what? You can't win, man. You can't win. So it's definitely something you just have to be mindful of and you have to be careful because no one wants to get burned. So this one is a little bit more specific to Melbourne, but that is if you really like good beaches, don't come to Melbourne for beaches. When you think of Australian beaches, they're not in Melbourne. They're probably in Sydney or they're probably in Perth. Melbourne just does not have good beaches. I'm talking more about the city. Yeah, I don't know what it is. I think it's more just how it was designed and how the layout is. The beaches in Melbourne are not the move. They're very small, they're kind of dirty sometimes, and the water is so cold. And also there's jellyfish in the water certain times of the year. So I've had friends going out and get stung by jellyfish. Like, I don't want to do that. And sometimes there's sharks too. Like, more examples of just how bad the animals are here. But don't get me started on a drop bear. I'll explain that later in the video because we gotta save it for last. If you're someone who doesn't like a good time out or doesn't really like drinking or socializing, don't come to Australia. The culture here is so big on going out and getting a drink, you know, having a beer with your friends or going out for cocktails. It's very quite heavy on a drinking culture. I, for one, don't drink a lot. Maybe I have like 1 or 2 drinks on a night out. They do have like good alternatives, like there's mocktails, and so you can just have soda or water. I don't think it's really that people make me feel bad about it, but I think it's just such a culture of going out and getting a drink. And if you're not drinking, it's kind of like, oh wait, why are you not drinking? Is there a reason? But I did have one Irish guy tell me that he started drinking at 12, so I think that beats it. If you're someone that travels a lot, Australia is really good to travel within the country, but because it's such a remote part of the world, it's quite difficult to travel out to. So for example, if you're going to Europe, it's gonna take you at least 24 hours, sometimes more than 24 hours. And if you had to fly over to New York City, for example, that's also gonna take you more than 24 hours to get to. It's just so remote, it's so difficult to travel around. I mean, definitely a lot of Australians travel. How many times have you been in another country and there's a random Australian? I feel like we're everywhere. Another harder thing is that the dollar just doesn't go as far in Australia as it does in other parts of the world. So for example, at the recording of this video, the US dollar to the Australian dollar is roughly like 60 to 70 cents. So anytime you buy something in the US or maybe in Europe as well with the euro, you're pretty much paying double what you would in Australia. So if you really care about how far your dollar goes, maybe you shouldn't move to Australia. It's not the best. Also, to add on to the dollar as well, the cost of living here is really quite high. Even as a middle-class person, I feel like I can still live a good life better than I was in California, where I feel like that cost of living is like a whole different space.
Bruh.
But the cost of living here is quite expensive. Groceries have really gotten more expensive. The housing crisis is insane as well. So if you're looking to move, it's actually really difficult to find a place without renters history. So what I'd recommend is there is a Facebook group called Fairy Floss that you can join. That's where a ton of people put their sublets, or maybe they're transferring a lease. That's how I ended up transferring my lease at my last apartment. So that's for people who are traveling or moving. So they just put their listing up on Facebook. It's a really great way if you don't have renters history to find a place. So reflecting on the dollar as well, you will just generally earn less money here than you would, say, in the US. I know I'm doing a lot of comparisons to the US, but it's just what I know, so I'm gonna talk about what I know. There is still really strong career growth. Because I work in recruitment, I know so many people who are earning a really good dollar, to be honest, and have multiple properties, like they're very well off. So you can definitely do that here. I just feel like if you're trying to make an exorbitant amount of money, the US is more where I feel like you can flourish because the taxes here are quite high as well in comparison. I'd recommend looking up what tax bracket you're in and having a look there because I think it's very personal for your taxes rather than me just kind of giving you some random stats. Except if you're working in the mines, you're gonna make bank. I've heard of people working in the mines and their starting salary is like 200K. It's crazy. It's very high risk and you're very bored, but you'll make a lot of money. One thing that I've heard a lot on TikTok actually is tall poppy syndrome. It refers to people with notable public success who excessively promote their own achievements and opinions. Intense scrutiny and criticism of such person is named as cutting down the tall poppy. What it really means to me is that if someone has a lot of success and talks about their success, they're kind of cut down and resented for talking about it. In America, I feel like it's very normal to talk about your successes. I'm definitely like that. And coming here, you know, I'll talk about my successes and I think people quite support it. But at the same time, I've just heard a lot on social media and in just different news. I think it's more within smaller communities that have grown up in Australia. People will really hate on you if you're successful. So because of tall poppy syndrome, a lot of people just kind of like to coast and sit where they're at. They don't want huge successes for themselves. I know there's obviously some outliers and people want success, but people just kind of don't want to rock the boat, don't want to over talk about themselves. They want to remain humble, and that's completely fine as well. But I think that's something to consider if you're looking to move to Australia. One interesting thing here is the drinking water. Now, I find the drinking water in Melbourne totally fine, but I actually had a friend who had really bad digestive problems, horrible health issues from drinking the water. I have no issue with it and I drink tap water all the time, and this is just a unique case with her. She has to only buy bottled water now because what's in the water is fluoride. So tap water is totally safe to drink, but I think with her case, she's quite sensitive to fluoride. If you're someone who's quite sensitive to minerals and other things within water, definitely look up the list of what's in Australian tap water and consider it for yourself. If you like consistent weather, don't move to Australia. I'm sure so many people talk about how bad the weather is. You'll get 4 seasons in one day here, and it's absolutely true. There's so many times where I've dressed up for a nice sunny day and I am freezing and shaking and I need to go buy a jumper. Overall, it doesn't even snow in Melbourne. I think there's some other parts of Victoria where it does snow, so it doesn't get that cold, but I think it's around like -5 degrees Celsius, but it does get so hot in the summer. It's always around like 40 degrees, sometimes more than 40 degrees. It's horrible. And because of those really high temperatures, wildfires are definitely a thing. I know California has really bad wildfires, so I feel like it's something that I'm a little bit more used to, but still, it's really tough. So I know that was all quite pessimistic on why you should not move to Australia, but there are also so many other reasons that you should move to Australia. I'm planning to do another video. Let's make this a little bit lighter, and down in the comments, please put something that is actually great about Australia and that you love about Australia so that people don't get turned off, because this is an amazing country. I really love being here, and I'm so thankful to be a citizen and be born here. My hand is getting tired from holding this mic, so that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching and much love. Oh my god, I almost forgot to talk about the drop bear. So this is probably one of the most scariest things that they have in Australia, and no one really talks about them because they're actually so scary. I haven't even described what a drop bear is. A drop bear is